It came to Mojave. It was the only time that Echo chose to look at him, but when she did, Daniel saw something on her face that he hadn't expected to see, a look of sadness. I have a wife, yes, I remember now, but why does that make me feel empty? It was as if a puzzle was being put together, piece by piece. The woman's voice in dreams had to mean something, something important. Daniel only nodded his head to show Echo that he was ready, ready for all of it. She moved over to a clearing of large stones. She sat down and motioned for Daniel to sit on the one opposite hers. So, where do you think you are? She asked while waving a hand in the air, indicating their surroundings. Why was she starting there? Of course, he was curious about where he was, but he would instead begin with the fact that he was married and only now remembered. Even more strange that the stranger Echo knew that fact, but he didn't. But as Daniel thought about it, he realized that she must have known all this as well, and he would have to trust that she was leading him in the right direction. I'm with you, and we are in some kind of open field somewhere. Daniel knew he only stated the obvious, but what else could he say? There was something more, a few words, or perhaps it was a name. Either way, it made no sense, so he opted not to say. Echo frowned. Did she know that he was holding back? No, we are in the same place you were since you woke up. She looked right into his eyes. All of a sudden, he felt a little intimidated by her. The same place, she repeated while pointing a finger to the ground. There was a slight hesitation, but only for a moment, Purple World. He said it, thinking he sounded foolish for doing so, but it had been the name that stood at the top of his tongue. Yes, do you remember what Purple World is? Daniel shook his head. He didn't. How could he? He didn't even remember he had a wife. That's not surprising. Don't feel too bad about it. The others before you forgot as well. Daniel raised an eyebrow, but thought it wasn't the time for questions just yet. He suspected that he would have plenty. Echo took a deep breath before continuing. 5 years ago, it came from the sky, when we assumed it was only a standard meteor, and that it was supposed to miss Earth, instead of changing course like it was guided here. It definitely raised some eyebrows, but the experts were so sure that it would burn up in the atmosphere. It did not. Instead, it came here to Mojave, a huge piece of metallic rock the size of a small town. It had a purplish look to it, so somebody with all the intelligence dubbed it Purple Rock. Hey, that got both of them to smile. Anyway, the material it was made of was of interest to certain government officials, and I'm sure it caught the eye of even more savvy people than that. But the exterior was hard to crack. It was only because the meteor had openings in it that they could go inside. Despite the apparent safety concerns, the government sent teams inside. Most made it out fine, all but one. I wasn't there at the time, so I'd heard all this secondhand, but according to records, the missing personnel was an army chaplain. It was an old tradition of a priest first on an expedition. The idea was that if extraterrestrial life forms were encountered, a man of peace should be the first to greet them. In any case, he went off on his own for a little bit. However, he was still in radio contact. He said he found a door of some kind, a set of red doors. This time, Daniel couldn't help but say something. Wait, are those red doors the same ones we ran into? Nodding her head, she went on with the story. He was told to stay put until the rest of his unit reached him. He obeyed, but before the others could arrive, he said the doors had started to open and that there was this light. That was the last anyone saw or heard from him. When his unit did arrive, they didn't find the chaplain or the red doors he reportedly saw. But what did happen was the meteor started to change. It was like an earthquake, but it was only inside the meteor. Within minutes, the hunk of space rock looked man-made, like a cathedral. We couldn't ignore the coincidence of the priests disappearing and suddenly, Purple Rock becoming something else. It was another few days before another expedition was approved to find the chaplain. But the inside changed as well, and it kept changing, so much so that we could only map the interior with a fraction of accuracy. Every day was a new maze to get lost, but that wasn't the most frightening part. The real issue was the disappearance kept happening. More than a few of us wanted off the project, but they had potent ways of motivating compliance. At first, it appeared random which of us would be taken and which would be left behind. It became sort of a sick game we would play. It was the only lottery that nobody wanted to win. But then somebody started to see a pattern. When one of us was taken, they would simply replace the lost one. Out of the original crew, only one remained. Echo touched her chest, indicating she was referring to herself. I was left behind, and Dr. Ranger put together a theory about what was happening. He asked me many questions and found that I may have some habits that offered some protection against the celestial. People who spend time together talk to each other, become friendly, and even form close relationships. That was the case for everyone that had been taken. There was a little of a pause as Echo could see the question that Daniel had, what he wanted to say, but perhaps not wanting to sound insensitive, he didn't. So she decided she would answer regardless. You're wondering what made me unique and why the celestial never abducted me? Daniel nodded in silence. He was curious, but also didn't want to upset the flow of the story. He thought perhaps he would get answers along the way, even if they weren't immediate. I have something called reactive attachment disorder, a fancy way for doctors to say I don't like to hold hands. I don't get people, so I never really connected with them. I never share anything personal. I don't meet up and have a drink with them. I don't do any of that. Some say that's weird, and I suppose that's true. However, according to Ranger, somehow, the celestial could sense people's relations with each other. Whenever people got too familiar with each other, they were taken by the celestial. It became a rule for us to not know too much about each other, not even each other's names. A bit excessive, but those were the rules put in place to prevent further abductions. But where there are rules, there would be those who break them. I came here with a whole team behind me. Without me noticing, they grew too close to each other. They knew I would disapprove, so they kept it hidden from me. I wouldn't have let them anywhere near the celestial if I had known. Now I'm all that's left. Daniel sat there and tried to absorb all that he heard. As unbelievable as the story was, Daniel believed all of it. However, that didn't matter. None of it mattered because he couldn't see what that had to do with him. So Echo Daniel finally responds, let's say I believe all of that. What does that have to do with me? Why am I here? You're here to feed the celestial, Echo said bluntly.